Does Mother's Day fill you with dread? Do you feel the weight of grief getting heavier as the day approaches, even if you didn't expect it to? Maybe you find yourself avoiding the card aisle, dreading social media, or wondering if anyone will even acknowledge you as a mother. If you're feeling that heaviness, you're not alone. Mother's Day can be one of the hardest days of the year for bereaved moms. That's why today I'm sitting down with Dr. Marcy Larson, host of Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom, to talk about what this day brings up, why grief can feel so intense, and how we can navigate it with more gentleness and intention. Whether this is your first Mother's Day without your child or your 10th, we'll share personal experiences, insights, and share ways for ourselves. I'll fix that. Whether this is your first Mother's Day without your child or your 10th, we'll share personal experiences, insights, and share ways to care for ourselves when the world doesn't seem to understand. Stick around, Angel Mom. This episode is for you. Dr. Marcy Larson is a pediatrician, wife, and mother. Her life took a tragic turn in August 2018 when her 14-year-old son, Andy, was killed in a car accident. This profound loss led her to create the podcast, Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom, where she openly discusses grief and child loss, offering hope and support to other grieving parents. Welcome to the show, Marcy.
Thanks so much for having me on, Lisa.
Now, before we get into anything else, I want to hear a little bit more about Andy.
It's my favorite thing to talk about, really, right? I mean, I know you love talking about Katie, and I love talking about Andy. We always love talking about our kids, and even after they're gone. So, Andy was my middle child. He it's hard to even explain him really, right? To be able to explain in just a few words, but he was an emotional kid. His highs were really high, but his lows were really low too. He loved being around other people. He loved being on a team. He loved singing. Oh, I say that because we just last week had the Andy Larson Memorial Concert in his name. So he was a senior head chorister for the Grand Rapids Choir of Men and Boys. And it's a choir that's in that great old English tradition of the big men and boys choirs. And we had the privilege to have the St. John's Choir come over from Cambridge and sing for Andy. And sing with our choir, and it was really, really spectacular. So obviously Andy's always on my heart, but this timing is pretty tremendous, having just gone through that experience again. But anyway, he was really fun kid. He was awesome. He was going into high school. He had just made the JV soccer team for the high school, and he was on top of the world. He was really, really on cloud nine. And his favorite expression was always, "I'm so excited." He would be so excited to do this, that, and the other thing. And I remember picking him up from orientation for high school that day, and he said, "I'm so excited, Mom." And I said, "What are you excited about, buddy? You excited you're going to soccer practice tonight? You excited for the friends that you were meeting?" "Nope, I'm excited because we're going to the baseball game tonight because we were going to a Whitecaps, that's our single A baseball team here in town." And he was excited because he was going to get all he can eat food there because my office had rented a deck out in the outfield, and they could have all the food they could eat. And my son Peter had actually fasted like all day pretty much so that he would be able to eat all this junk food at the baseball game. So he had to go to soccer practice that night. We were doing a carpool. He was texting me the whole way home in the carpool, like funny pictures and how excited he was. He ran upstairs, changed, um, and then we got in the car to head to the baseball game. And I remember turning to my husband and saying, "This isn't too bad," because the traffic often gets quite bad at that exit lane to go to the game. And we were just about ready to pull over in the exit lane. And then that's the last thing I remember. Uh, the next thing I remember, I think it's about 30 to 40 minutes later. I remember opening my eyes, seeing my husband in front of me. He was bleeding from his head. I turned over, looked over my right shoulder, and they were doing CPR on my boy. My boy that had just been so alive. I mean, we just had a conversation about how he wanted to read The Lord of the Rings. Like, that's the last thing I talked to him about before I had said that comment to my husband. The last thing I said, oh, that'd be a great book for you to read. He always wanted to pick a book series to read, and that's the one he wanted to read. And I said, we've got a copy in the office. I'll get it as soon as the game's done. And then that was it, right? That's when my world changed forever. Because they were unable to bring him back. I started screaming, and my other son was there watching them do the CPR as well. Eric had tried working on him. My husband's an anesthesiologist, so he actually tried working on him for quite a while until they stopped and took over and told him to be near me. And then, they told us we have to put you in an ambulance because we want to check you out. And they brought us to the ambulance, but it wasn't to check us out. They brought us to the ambulance and said, despite our best efforts, we were unable to save your son. Those are words I'll never, ever forget. It's so funny. Many things are very cloudy about that day, and many memories are gone. But that's a memory that's there forever, you know?
I suspect every parent remembers that moment, whatever their moment is. For us, it was when the police officer and the coroner were standing in our front room.
Right.
I'm so sorry, Marcy.
Yeah.
When you and I were emailing back and forth prior to the show, you had mentioned that you have a story about a picture that Andy drew at the age of 7. Can you
Yeah.
tell the listeners
I
a little bit about that?
yeah, sure. It's actually a story that we thought about that night even, So obviously we were told that Andy had died. We had to be brought to the hospital because obviously it was a very severe car accident. Peter had a fairly significant concussion. My other son, it was just the four of us in the car. My other daughter and my other foster son were not in the car with us, but they had to admit us overnight to the hospital. And they just had us all in the same room. And I remember it was maybe just a few hours after Andy died, and Eric looked at me and said, "Remember the picture?" And I said, "Of course I do." Because when he was about 7, I picked him up from school, just as I always do, and he was buckled up in the back and in his booster seat. And he had this big picture that he had all rolled up. And he was so excited to show it to me. So he's talking the entire way home about this picture and how he drew this picture in art class. And the picture is of the family. And he drew a picture of the whole family. And he's just jabbering on and on about it. And we get home. I open up the door to our minivan and I go to unbuckle him. And he wouldn't even let me unbuckle him before he unrolled the picture to show me this picture. And it's got the sun in the corner and a big tree. And then it's got a family. But it had a family of 4 in the picture. And we were a family of 5. This is before we had our foster son. So we were a family of 5. And I looked at that picture and thought, who in the heck did he forget? I mean, like, is he mad at his brother? Is he mad at his sister? Who did he not put in the picture? And I turned to him and said, Andy, there are only 4 people in the picture. Who's not in the picture? And he just looked up at me and very matter of factly said to me, Mommy, I'm not in the picture. I'm not going to grow up all the way. And that's exactly what happened. Like he grew up part way, but he didn't grow up all the way. And what's funny is when he said that, I'm not going to grow up all the way, I immediately, like something in my heart, knew that that was true, that that's what was going to happen. It terrified me, actually. People have asked me years later, do you still have the picture? No, absolutely not. Like the second he forgot about that picture, I threw away that darn picture because I did not want there to be a world that we were just a family of 4. But what's crazy is that he was so totally okay with it. Like he just like I said, so matter-of-factly said, I'm not in the picture, mommy. I'm not going to grow up all the way. Like he wasn't upset about it. He said, I'm not in the picture, mommy. I'm in heaven. That's what he said. I'm in heaven. I'm not going to grow up all the way. So I don't know. It just, I mean, that night, as Eric and I talked in the middle of the night about how at least at one moment when he was 7 years old, God gave him a little glimpse that he wasn't going to grow up all the way and that he was going to be in heaven. And he gave that to me as a gift. So I would have that later on. And so I would know that he knew that he was going to be in heaven and that he was totally okay with it. Even though I was clearly not okay with it,
Right.
none of us were okay with it, anyone else. And I think had I asked him about that picture 2 weeks later, he would not have remembered saying that. He wouldn't have remembered anything about it. I feel like it was just a moment, kind of a gift that he was given, that little moment of clarity to kind of share that with me. So,
Isn't that incredible?
yeah.
There's just as you're telling this, I had a little flashback myself, and I can't remember if I've shared this publicly or not. Um, but when Katie was a tiny baby, I was very overprotective of her in every sense. Going back to work, for example, was horrifying. Like I would count the minutes until I would see her again. It's almost like my soul knew that I wouldn't have her forever either. And there were a number of things that happened through my life that my soul kind of knew something. I didn't have the clarity that Andy did. But it just makes you scratch your head a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and the fact that I didn't that my response in my heart was that I knew it was right. Like I
Mm,
knew that that was the right thing. I didn't say, "Oh, don't be silly, Andy," or whatever. It just was like I I just knew it was right.
yeah.
I mean, I hated that it was right, and I didn't want to think about the fact that it was right. And I don't know why I did tell other people that story, but I did tell people that story at the time. I told friends of mine what had happened with the picture. I think I was really terrified about it, but
Yeah.
I was glad that I did because then 7 years later, when he died, they remembered. Like I had told them. It wasn't like I just made up the story later after he died. Like many people had heard that. And, I told that. I spoke at Andy's funeral and I told that story at his funeral to, many gasps in the crowd. But also, there were a lot of people who remembered that because I had shared that at the time.
So surreal.
Mhm.
Now, I want to talk a minute about your profession. You are a pediatrician
Yeah.
and you're also a bereaved mother. So
Yeah.
you have this unique perspective, let's say, of child loss, of grief.
Yeah. I
Do
I do.
you?
And I have to say too, it even goes a little bit before that because before I went to medical school, when I was in college, like applying for medical school, my mom died of cancer when I was in the midst of doing all of my med school applications. In fact, the story of when she died is a sad one in that I it was Christmas time. We she was had much of chemotherapy and the chemotherapy had actually put her in heart failure. And I was home over Christmas break. My parents were going to move from our house, which was a two-story house, into a condo because she couldn't handle the stairs anymore. And we had decided she got admitted. She wasn't doing great, obviously. So she got admitted to the hospital, and the closing on the house was soon. And so my dad and my brother went home to move everything and to move all of my mom's stuff so that when my mom got discharged from the hospital, then she didn't have to go back to the house at all. She could just go to the condo. And so that's what was in all of our mindset. right? And it's Christmas Eve. So this is Christmas Eve. My dad and my brother aren't there. I'm the only one there. And these two nurses walk into the room and they said to me, can we talk to you for a minute? Now, granted, I am 21 years old, so I'm young. Can we talk to you for a minute? So they pulled me out of the room, and one of them looked at me and said, we're thinking you shouldn't be here by yourself because your mom could die at any moment. And we didn't know because no one had told us. And so I had to turn around and walk into that room. And my mom looked at me and she saw the tears in my eyes and she said, I'm dying, aren't I? And I had to say, yes, Mom, you are. And I went over to her bed and she, as all mothers would do, stroked my head and comforted me because I was so upset over this. But I remember thinking afterwards, and she was she was transferred to a hospice unit the next day, died 3 days later. But I remember thinking through all this, that somebody really screwed up. Like, right? I thought, certainly they taught doctors and nurses better than this. And somebody just wasn't paying attention in nursing school or medical school or whatever, right? Because the nurses clearly thought the doctors had told us. And what they had said to us was, your mom, I mean, to me, or, to my mom, you would be a perfect candidate for a heart transplant if you didn't have cancer. And what they meant by that was, but since you have cancer, we can't give you a heart transplant. And since we can't give you a heart transplant, you're going to die. But they didn't say that. They didn't say that at all. They just said you'd be a perfect candidate for a heart transplant, but you have cancer. Dot, dot, dot. Fill that in. But no one said it to us. And so I certainly thought that I would be able to do better. Because as you know, like, I'm applying to medical school. I'm doing all of this stuff, all the prerequisites, doing all the tests and things I have to do. I get accepted to medical school almost a year to the day afterwards. And then it turns out I go to medical school, and it's not that I mean, they screwed up. No question, they screwed up. But no one teaches you that. No one does. No one teaches you how to talk to families who are going through death and dying and whatever. So I didn't do it right either. I mean, I totally didn't. I think back to all the families and all the kids that I had to be there when their child died. And I would, like, the right thing to do was, the child's dying, and then you walk out and you give them time to be alone, right? You don't like say much to them at all. And there's one time that I felt like I totally screwed it up. And for years I thought I screwed it up. So we had a patient who'd been in the peds ICU for a year. I'd taken care of her on and off. When I'd on a month, I'd take care of her. I talked to her parents. I knew both the parents really well. She was a little, like, 13, 14-month-old girl. Maybe she was a little older than that now, but she was still so tiny. She had heart trouble. And I did not expect her to die. Like, did not. And I walked into the PICU one morning and it's like deathly quiet. It is, I shouldn't use that term, but it was so quiet in there. But there were tons of people. And I found out that this little girl had died. And all I kept thinking to myself was, okay, you got to go in there and you got to see this mother, but you got to hold it together. You cannot cry. You cannot do anything. You got to keep it together. And I walked in and I looked at her holding her baby, who now had no tubes hooked up to her, no IVs, nothing, just holding her baby. And I started to cry. And she opened up her arms to me and she hugged me, and we hugged each other, holding her newly deceased little girl between us. And she looked at me and she said, Marcy, you're going to be a really great general pediatrician. But what I heard in my head was, you better do general pediatrics, honey, because you suck at this. That's what I heard. And for years, that's what I thought she meant, until I lost Andy. And then I realized, and I so wish I could find her today. I realized what she really meant, because what's funny is I talk to all sorts of bereaved parents who lost their kid in the hospital, and if I tell this story, oftentimes they stop me and say, "No, no, no, that's not what she meant." And I say, "Oh, I know that now. I know that now." Because I had another friend who lost her son, and he had a heart problem, and they decided to go back on his birthday, go back to the University of Michigan hospitals and visit the people who had taken care of her. And she went and she saw all the nurses and all these doctors, and she sees this cardiac fellow, and she's walking down the hallway, and they see her and they get closer, and the woman starts to cry. The doctor starts to cry. And of all the stories, that's the only one she told. And that doctor said, "I don't know why I'm crying. I told myself I wasn't going to cry. I'm so sorry I'm crying." But to my friend Cassie, that's the only story she told, because that was the one that showed that she cared about that little boy, and that he meant something to them, and her, and they meant something to her. And then I realized that was that moment when she was telling that story that I was like, that mom meant you're going to be a great pediatrician because you care. And you just showed me that you care. And you're going to do a great job caring for your patients. And it just changed my whole outlook. Right. So now I think about things so differently. And now my husband and I actually go around and we speak to different medical groups. We speak to physician nurses groups and things like that about that, trying to share that it is okay to look human, and it is okay to show that you care, because in all actuality, that's what the parents want. They
Yes.
don't want someone that seems like they're professional, because that actually to them feels cold and detached. I've had so many parents say, like, I just was talking to a woman on Friday, and she was talking about the last oncologist that they had. And she said his bedside manner was horrible. And I can guarantee you he thought he was being really professional and really
Yeah.
doing a good job.
Yeah.
Right? She said, he drew everything out in pictures. I didn't need to see pictures of my daughter's cancer. He could have just told me. And like, he thought he was doing it the right way. And he totally wasn't. Right? He needed to look at them with compassion and like and share with them this devastating news that the cancer had returned and the cancer was everywhere and there's nothing they can do. But when it's told in such a detached way,
Mhm.
I mean, it just doesn't work. So you're right. I've kind of been on both sides, and I think I've done it wrong, even though I had the experience of having it done wrong to me, and I still did it wrong. So it's I don't know. It's an important thing, I think.
Absolutely. And interesting. I'm really interested to hear more about you and your husband doing talks to medical staff, because I've started doing that as well. And that, amongst other messages that I have to deliver, is that as well as be a human first.
Yes.
And that hugs are okay, especially in
Yeah.
this post-COVID world that we're living in. I don't know that we've actually gotten back to real human connection, but hugs are okay.
Yeah.
Always ask first, obviously. And that tears are okay as well, as long as you're not a bigger mess than the
Right.
person
Right.
that you are trying to
Exactly.
console. But
No
being
question. No
human,
question. I think tears are good, but you're right. You cannot now have that person feel like they need to be comforting you. Okay?
exactly, exactly. But to show that you're human, you care, and that their person, their child, their situation is deeply meaningful to you
Mhm.
is more important than all the professional mumbo jumbo and the professional face, and like you're right,
Yeah.
it does come across as very cold,
Yeah.
and I think that we can
I've heard
stop it.
that so many times from so many parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is something, so thank you for that work that you're doing with medical professionals as
And
well,
I
because
feel like
they
too now in my job as just a general pediatrician, I see things so much differently than I did before.
100%.
See people's pain in a different way. I
Yeah.
even when I feel like people come in for something that is relatively minor, right? So
Hmm.
somebody's coming in and made an appointment for their child or come to the walk-in clinic with their child and they've had a fever for 2 hours. I am not worried about that. Okay. But clearly they are worried about that. And I don't know why. It may be that their cousin's, boss's child had a fever, and then next thing you know, it was a bacterial meningitis and they died, or that they have overwhelming anxiety about something, or they're worried that if they take their kid to daycare and they had a fever, now they're going to get kicked out, or they have to call into work, they're going to lose their job. There's so many things that are affecting that I feel like I understand in a better way now, right?
Mhm.
That I'm able to see past some of this to what is going on behind and what is going on in somebody's mind, and hopefully can help alleviate some of that.
Was it hard for you to go back to
Oh,
work
yes.
as a doctor
Yes, yes,
after
yes.
losing Andy?
It it was yes. It feels almost impossible to be honest with you. So
I bet.
I went back just a few weeks after, maybe 6 weeks. Eric had gone back. My husband had gone back 3 or 4 weeks after, probably 3 weeks. Um, Although they were very much sheltered him. They sent him back. He just went to a plastic surgery center, taking care of really healthy adults that were just getting like tummy tucks and boob jobs and that kind of thing. So it was kind of easy. Nothing was life and death there. He didn't have to take care of any kids. It was a very small group of people, so he didn't have to look at get all these looks from people. And he said, it's just so helpful. You just need to go back to work. You just need to go back to work. Because I was just a crying mess at home. And he just kept encouraging me to go back to work. So I did. But it was a disaster. I mean, it was horrible for me. I went in, I cried between every single patient. I mean, every patient I saw, I got the puppy dog look, and I barely could hold it together to see them for their child's visit. And then I'd cry. And then I try to get myself back together and then go see the next one and then cry. I mean, it was so bad. So by November, so he died in August. I tried to go back to work probably later September, probably later September. I lasted about 5 or 6 weeks and then I just quit. I just was done because it just was too much for me. I just couldn't handle it. And I was thinking I was probably done. You know, I just didn't know how I could do it again. I just couldn't see all these whole families when mine was so broken and I felt so broken. And it's weird to say this, but other people have said it to me, so I don't think it's totally unusual. When you when I'm trying to help other people care for their children, I sort of felt like a fraud because I couldn't even keep my own kid alive.
Oh,
Like,
Marcy.
I can't keep my kid alive. So how am I giving you advice at all? And obviously, it's it was under no control of mine, right? We were rear-ended. It was a woman totally not paying attention, speeding in a construction zone. She goes over because she's also exiting to go to the baseball game, probably talking with her son who is in the front seat of the car. Um, like going way too fast. In fact, we heard a story from another doctor in that we know who had a patient come in who was so traumatized because she witnessed our accident.
Oh,
And
dear.
I guess as the woman flew past her, driving past, she said, that woman's going to kill someone. And then literally, what, 20 seconds later, she did.
Oh, boy.
So, I mean, there was nothing we could have done. There's nothing my husband could have done. I tell myself, like, what if I'd have noticed? What if I'd have been able to cry out? What if could he have done something differently? I mean, who knows? I ultimately you have to kind of give that up, but
Right.
it is a lot of what if, all the things you could have done differently. I mean, I go
Mhm.
back to why did I let him change out of his soccer uniform? Why did I not let him? But why would I have made him go sweaty to the baseball game? Like that wouldn't have made sense to make him go sweaty. But in my head, I can come up with all these other
Oh,
little
yeah.
things that would have put us in a tiny bit different position on
Hmm.
the road, which meant we wouldn't have been the one she hit.
Right.
Although she would have killed someone else, right? I mean, I don't think there was any fact that she wasn't going to kill someone with how she was driving.
Yeah.
But
It's interesting you should
anyway,
say that, that phrase, I couldn't even keep my own child alive, because I think it was approximately 3 years after we lost Katie, and I had had a code blue situation at the cancer clinic where I work. And that was the one and only, touch wood, one and only code blue I've actually encountered as a radiation therapist. I've been very lucky. And just the way the whole code went down, um, I was actually injured. So I was going through a workers' compensation physio program, and they couldn't figure out what was holding me back from actually getting better physically. And I had said, I don't know why, but my brain is connecting this code, and my complete, like, even though, through lots of therapy and all that, like, I did everything I was supposed to do. If that situation happens again, I know that I have the skills and the knowledge to execute it properly. But my brain felt so, um, like everything was happening out of my control.
Yeah.
So my brain connected this code situation in my clinic to Katie's accident.
Yeah.
This rush of medical experts. I mean, you've probably been involved in a code as well. All of these people are in the room firing all these questions at me, wanting to know, what was going on with my patient, what happened, why did he go down, what's his diagnosis, and just, and pretty much my knees are buckling. Anyway, fast forward, I'm in physio for this terrible neck injury I sustained because the patient and I fell together. And they finally put two and two together, and they get me going into therapy that goes along the physical rehabilitation piece. And I had never said this in therapy before, but the tears were just coming down my face and I was sobbing. And I have to say, as broken as I am about Katie's loss, I'm not a big crier. I express my grief in other ways, but I was sobbing in this appointment. And it came just like verbal vomit out of my mouth. I'm her mother. I had one job,
Right.
and that was to keep her alive. And I
Yeah.
failed. And like you, I lost Katie in a car accident. It was an accident. They call them an accident for a reason. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't your fault. It was, you, in your situation, there was another driver at fault. This Katie's accident was actually her fault. But I think that's something that as mothers, we do
Yeah.
hang on to, whether there's factual stuff there to back it up or not. But it's like this instinct within us.
Yeah.
We somehow
I always think
failed.
back to when COVID came through and everybody's going online and they're all complaining about how much time they have to spend their kids and they're all stuck with their kids and
Oh, yeah.
all this stuff like, well, at least they're still alive. And every time I read that, what would go through my mind was, and I couldn't even do that. I mean,
Mhm.
every single time,
Yeah.
every time.
Yeah.
Because it just like ultimately you feel like that's your job. That's your job. And I was a pediatrician mom. So I really felt like I was the one to keep her alive, right? When stuff
Mhm.
happens and we're like out in the community and we're around somebody that goes down, the first thing we do is look, is it a kid? Is it an adult? If it's a kid, it's me. If it's an adult, it's Eric. I mean, we've been at events before. And I saw a kid go down. I'm like handing Eric the kids to Eric. I'm going to take care of the kid. And what was really funny is then an adult saw him pass out and hit his head, and then she passed out, and then he passes the kids off to his mother, and then we're both taking care of people. So,
Oh my
I mean,
goodness.
but it's just kind of in you, right? It's in
Mhm.
us
Mhm.
that we care for other people, but it's kids are me, and my kids are especially me.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah, it's interesting. And then I think, we're both medical experts as well. So then you add that to the mix, and it's like in every cell of our body as mothers
right.
and medical professionals to help, right?
Well, and you say that about, that code situation. So the next year or so, maybe it was probably a year and a half later, we do CPR training. You have to do CPR training
Mm-hmm.
every other year in April. And I show up, I walk in the room, I looked at the mannequin, and all I could see was Andy.
Oh
I
gosh.
could not even see that. I could see just Andy and them doing CPR on Andy and like, I cannot do this. I cannot do this. So to this day, I'm the only uncertified person at Forest Hills Pediatrics. I am not certified in CPR. I'm just not. And we've all just decided that of the 40 employees at Forest Hills Pediatrics, I'm just the one that's not going to be certified, and that will be okay. I
Yeah.
mean, in a pinch, could I probably do it? Probably so. But in general, are there better choices than me in the office? Yes. Every single other one is probably a better choice than me, just
Oh,
given the fact that I, saw it done on my son.
for sure.
The first time Eric had to do CPR after Andy died was really hard for him.
I bet.
Obviously he has to do that, not often,
Hmm.
but he has to do that. And it's very hard. And what's funny is probably it was a couple years ago he had a patient die, and of course was involved in the code and had to do CPR, and the patient died in the operating room. Obviously, a very very sick person, but uh, he gets done, and somebody said, and he was supposed to be on call that night, and somebody said, "You want me to do your call tonight?" And Eric's like, "Yeah, I think you do." Right? And I think actually that one of the very first calls that he had after was a gift of life call that he had to do organ harvesting on some newly deceased person, and he gave that up too for somebody else to do that because there are some things that are just hard now.
Too close to
They're
home.
just too close to home. Too
Yeah.
close to home.
Wow. You guys have been through so much. I want to just pivot here a little bit.
Yeah,
At the time that this episode comes out, it's going to be just a couple of days before Mother's Day.
right.
And you've been on your journey 7 years now. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Is my math
Yep.
correct? And yeah, I've been about 9.5. And I thought, here we have a couple of quote unquote experienced bereaved moms. And I thought I'd just take this opportunity. Let's have a discussion about Mother's Day after child loss. Do you
Yeah.
remember your first Mother's Day, or is it a complete blur?
Um, it's more of a blur, to be honest. And what's funny with me too is that, when I was 21 years old and in college, my mother died. So Mother's Day has been hard for me for a long time since I was 21. That was my first hard Mother's Day without a mother. And then I became a mother. And then I thought, okay, I think I can have this back a little bit. Like I can celebrate this a little bit. I don't have a mother, but now I am a mother. So, we used to do something more for Mother's Day. It always was fairly low key because my husband knew that it was not an easy day for me having lost my mother. So I don't know that I'm like perfect person in some ways to talk about it, but yet, after losing Andy, I felt like I didn't even want to have anything to do with it. Like now I don't have a mother and I don't even feel like a mother. I still am a mother, right? I'm still a mother to other kids. Now, some people are and some people aren't, right? I know people who lose their only child and then they feel like are they still a mother? Which in my mind, yes, you're always a mother,
Yes.
but they feel that I'm not really sure where I fit now.
Hmm.
But I still really do fit in the category of I have living children who could celebrate Mother's Day.
Yeah.
But I've been not great at doing it, to be honest. It's just been something I don't really like to think about. It always comes within about 2 to 3 weeks of Andy's birthday.
Mm.
So that's hard.
Yeah.
Andy's first birthday that he was no longer on this earth was Easter. So it was Easter Sunday and his birthday. And then 3 weeks later was Mother's Day. So to be honest, I remember going to church on Easter. I remember throwing up at church on Easter. Like I just was so just physically ill. But then Mother's Day, like I just didn't even want to have anything to do with it, you know? Because again, even though I still as a mother, you don't feel like you're a decent mother. I feel like I'm a shell of a mother, right? I don't feel like I'm a great mother to people that I have. I'm not feeling like I'm doing a great job.
Well, I think you're right. Like being a shell of a mother is an excellent way to explain it. But I feel like, it's that balancing act that we're always, trying to honor our grief, right? Like this
Yeah.
horrible thing has happened. We're missing a part of our family, our child, but we're also trying to be a mom to our living children and figure out this thing called life again, right? So it's this constant,
Mhm.
balancing, and some days the grief wins more, and some days, life and all of that might win. I remember my first Mother's Day, parts of it. I mean, some of it is blurry, but
Yeah.
there are parts that stand out, and the parts that stand out are, I had the wherewithal. So this would be about, um, let's say 6 months after losing Katie. So still pretty fresh.
Yeah.
And May for me sucks because it's Mother's Day, Katie's birthday. 10 days later, it's my living son's birthday. It's our anniversary. It's my husband's birthday. Like it's just a lot.
Yeah.
But I remember having the wherewithal to spend time with my mother the week before. So,
Yeah.
we did whatever we did. I took her some flowers, all of that. And then when Mother's Day was approaching, I pretty much gave the hands off like to everybody. And I don't mean this to sound the wrong way, but this is my day. And I just mean that in the sense that I could be a hot mess. I might
Right.
be in bed. I'm doing me, and I don't want pressure to be anywhere or to be with anybody or do anything. And at the time, my son, who was 15, was off the rails, like dealing with Katie's grief in the worst, unhealthiest, most terrifying ways. I was not expecting much from him because he didn't want to remind me, right, of
Yeah.
Mother's Day. And then he was also just in this other awful space. And he did surprise me. He had gone to the garden center with my husband, and they had picked out a beautiful little angel ornament that, was going to go in the garden. And he had hugged me and, like did all the right things. But I just remember sitting like a zombie in our back
Yeah.
garden, where Katie liked to enjoy time. And, in May, thankfully it gets a little warmer here. And I just remember sitting there and just staring off into space and just feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. And I
Well,
don't
and I
know.
have to say, oh,
No.
was a good lesson to me because I really kind of at a long time kind of ignoring it and not wanting to pay attention to it.
Mm,
And it was my husband that taught me a good lesson and that, I was kind of wanting to ignore Mother's Day and not and a little bit like you, like I don't know how I'm going to be, so let's just be how I want to be and sort of follow my lead a little bit. And so I made the mistake of doing that for Father's Day and letting it not making it a deal. And he actually was really hurt by the fact that we didn't make it a big deal.
yeah.
So it was a great lesson to me on communication and how different people need different things and how he needed it to be a deal. He needed us to really celebrate Father's Day because he was still a dad and he really wanted to do that and was hurt that we didn't. And he said, I know that it hurts you more. And I know that I also have extra baggage because of my mom, right? And his dad's still alive and that's different.
Mhm.
But it just goes to show that we're so different. And so I think it is important to have that talk with your family about what you think you might need.
Yeah.
And if it changes, it changes. Right? I don't
Mhm.
think anything needs to be set in stone. All of these plans, you can make plans for Christmas and birthdays and Mother's Day and all this. You can have these little plans, but always make sure to give yourself an out that is okay to abandon all plans and do something completely different. And
100%.
make sure that your family knows that you may abandon all plans and do something different.
Yeah.
But if you want something, then let's talk about it a little
Yeah.
bit ahead of time on what you think you might want that day to look like. And
Absolutely.
whether it's, I really need it to be low key and I need you to not focus on it because I'm going to be thinking a lot about Andy or a lot about Katie or whatever,
Yeah.
or whether, you know what, we need a happy day.
Hmm.
And I'm going to remember back to how excited Andy was every single Mother's Day because he was. I mean, I told you he was like his highs were so high and lows were low. So, the guy hit a great golf shot and the world was amazing, and he hit a bad golf shot and oh my word, everything was ending. Right? That's just him. He was
Hmm.
highs were high and lows were low, but Mother's Day would be a high. Like he loved his mama probably more than anybody, and a day for his mama was going to be a great day and he was going to do something special. So, and if I'm in the kind of mood where I want to appreciate that and have a day how Andy might want me to have it, okay. But if I can't handle that, that's fine too.
Yeah.
Also, right? Because I mean, one thing that bothers me is when people say to me, "Oh, Andy wouldn't want you to be sad."
Oh boy. Yes.
Okay, I know that, whatever. Andy would not want me to be sad. But Andy hit a bad golf shot and he was sad. If his mama died, he would be sad, which means he would understand me being sad. It is okay that I am sad for him. And that's what I always put back. Whenever anybody says that to me, what like he wouldn't want you to be, or when other parents say, oh, they say to me, my daughter wouldn't want me to be sad, or my daughter said to me before she died, don't be sad. Like, okay, like that's
That's like
just not
saying don't be
reasonable.
human,
Right,
right?
right. I mean, I almost wish that you could say back to them, would you be sad? I mean, or like, I know if I would die, Andy would have been really sad.
Hmm.
So it's okay. It's okay for me to be sad.
Right.
No.
So do you
It's
ever,
funny because I just had somebody tell me, I just was interviewing someone the other day, and she had said her therapist, she was talking to her therapist about crying, and she said, oh, crying isn't pretty. And the therapist said back to her, no, crying isn't pretty. But crying after losing your daughter is beautiful.
oh,
And like,
wow.
that was profound to me. It's like, oh,
Very.
that's one that I'm going to remember.
Yes.
Because those are beautiful tears. Those are
Hmm.
excruciating tears, but they're beautiful
Hmm.
and they're purposeful.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you ever make loose plans for Mother's Day, or do you just kind of let the day unfold as it might?
I sort of let the day unfold as it might. It'll be interesting because this year we're actually going to be in Italy. So, which I
Wow.
don't think it probably will be Mother's Day in Italy, but we'll see. We'll see if there are any kind of plans for that. We still do try to do something for Eric's mother, I think a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't do a lot for me. I guess I still don't do a lot for me. How about you?
You know, it varies, but I am one of those weirdo people. I like to have a plan, and
Yeah.
it's nothing grandiose. But Katie loved her frou-frou Starbucks whipped creamy coffees. So we usually will start the day with something like that. It's just getting into gardening season. So I like to visit the garden centers and pick up something special for her corner of the garden. Either my husband or I will cook. We both enjoy cooking. So it's, kind of what would Katie like to have? And if we can spend time with my now adult son, that's even a bonus. But I like to have a plan.
Uh-huh.
And 99% of the time, when I have a plan, whatever it is, I feel like I feel a little bit more in control, as ridiculous as it is. But that's kind of the way I approach it. And it just feels right for me.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it can be really nice. And we oftentimes do, like I said, we go up north to our cottage, which is very near Eric's parents. So we do spend some time with them, and usually that weekend we are there. Um, Sometimes we'll say, go golfing or something, because that's something Andy really liked to do,
Mm-hmm.
or something like that, uh, or go out in the boat, or depending on the weather and things like that.
Yeah.
But we usually have something. And I do like to try to remember, both my mother and my son a little bit on
Mm-hmm.
Mother's Day.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about your podcast here for a second, because it seems to me now it's been a number of years since I was on
Yeah.
your
You
podcast.
were. I wasn't
Uh,
even doing the podcast in Andy's room. So I do it now in Andy's room. But at the
there you go.
time, I remember interviewing you and I was in my daughter's room.
There
So
you go.
isn't that funny?
But I remember you saying that the reason you started your podcast was because at the time when you were looking for podcasts around child loss and grief specific to parents, you
Hmm.
couldn't find one.
Nope. Couldn't find one at all. Now there are several. But
There
at
are
the
a few.
time, yeah. So Andy died in August 2018. It was January 2019 that I started looking. So, as a reminder, I quit working in November. I was doing a little bit of administrative work, so I wasn't totally at home. A couple days a week, I would go in and do some administrative work, but I was spending a lot of time at home. And my husband actually had a couple of podcasts that he did, one medical podcast and one on basketball of all things. But uh, I started thinking maybe I should listen to a podcast because it was very hard for me to concentrate enough to read a book, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought a podcast would be easier. And I thought, certainly with as many podcasts as there were at the time, that there would be one on child loss. And I went through and I found all sorts of podcasts on grief, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very good podcasts on grief. And, but nothing that was specific to child loss. And so it's so funny because it reminds me very much of Andy in the picture, that I just get this sort of epiphany that I'm supposed to start one, like just shoots in my head, like, you're supposed to start one. And I don't know why I really thought that, to be honest. And then my husband came home and I said, I was looking for a podcast on child loss and I don't think there are any. And he actually was like, there has to be something. So he starts looking and he said, you're right. I don't think there are any. And I mistakenly, I at the time said to him, I think I'm supposed to start one. And he totally jumped all over it, right? Because I'm at home, I'm not really working, I seem sort of lost, and it's maybe will give me a little sense of purpose in life. And I immediately like backpedaled and said, I don't really think so. I don't know why I said that. I'm not a very technologically savvy person. I don't think this will work for me. And he just kept just nudging me along. And then he found someone to do a website for me, like free, just because they, had known us and known our story and wanted to do that. And so by May, we kind of get this website going. And then it was August. It was right around just after the 1 year anniversary that we recorded our first episode. And what's funny is I recorded the first one with Eric. I go through, we talked for an hour in the basement up at our cottage up north. I get done. I look down at the computer and I had forgotten to press record.
Oh no.
So I looked at him and I like, oh, I didn't press record. And I wanted to almost take that as a sign, like, I'm not supposed to do this. And he's like, okay, that's fine. We'll just do it again. And the second time was better. I mean, there's no question. We did a better job the second
Yeah.
time. And I recorded it. And then I recorded two others. I'm a friend of mine, and then the person who was director at Starlight Ministries at the time, Gwen Capshaw. She still does about every 6 weeks. She does an episode with me on a different topic related to grief. And I released three because my husband said, don't just release one. You bunch up, you get like three,
Mm-hmm.
and then you release it. And we put out a media kind of release, and it was, it was pretty successful in those first three. And I remember my first Apple Podcast review coming, and it was from this woman who had lost her son to suicide, and she said, I couldn't get up out of bed until I listened to that episode. And then I was able to get up out of bed. And I read that. And I remember saying to Eric, if I just help her, it was enough.
Yeah.
And and now I've been going for over 6.5 years. Uh, it's I'm at through almost 300 episodes. 300 episodes will be in June. So it's crazy. I mean, it's just kept going on and on. They had the feed spot. They ranked the top 100 podcasts in the world, grief podcasts in the world, and I got a thing. I just was on Twitter randomly, and like they didn't notify me or anything. I'm just on there, and it said top 100 podcast grief podcasts you should listen to in 2025. And I thought, huh, I wonder if I'm on there. I thought I'm probably on there because it's a pretty, well-known podcast. And I go to scan through, and I was number 6 out of
Wow.
600 and some podcasts. I was like ranked 6th. So like, this is crazy. I look at ones below me and they're like really well-known podcasts out of really well-known places. Like, this is crazy that I am up there like that. But it has been, it's helped, I think, a lot of other people, but honestly, it's helped me a ton. So I started recording this. I started doing this in August. By November, I went back to work. I started going back to work and
Wow.
started just doing the walk-in clinic for the first couple of months. And then by January, I was back, really back, seeing patients, working the same number of hours, which is half time, that I did before Andy died. And I really credit the podcast to that. I think it gave me some purpose. It gave me something that I could do with my grief, that I could do with Andy, and that we could do kind of together. And I felt like I could have my days at the office and know that at that time it was all day Tuesday and all day Friday are my grief days. Like, I can work Monday and Wednesday and Thursday because Wednesday, Thursday, I know Friday's coming, and Friday's going to be, I'm going to work on my podcast, and I'm just going to work on my grief. And then Tuesday's coming, and I'm going to be able to do the same thing. So it was so helpful. And now it has gotten to the point where it isn't like, I don't feel like I need to spend all day Friday and all day Tuesday only looking at my grief, because it's just, I'm in a different place now.
Right.
But it still is so helpful to me to be able
Mhm.
to do that and give me a little sense of purpose, and it's hard because obviously I would take Andy back in a heartbeat, right?
Right. Absolutely.
But do I think I'm a better person now having experienced this? Yeah, actually I am. And it's hard to say that, and it was really hard to admit that the first time, that it actually could make me better, because I didn't want anything good to have come of it. Like,
Yes.
nothing good can come from this horrible, horrible thing. But I think of it as, in spite of the horribleness of Andy's death, it can make me better. So instead of because of, it's in spite of, right? It's
Yes.
that can really help you to grow, to be a more compassionate person, to be more of an understanding of pain. It just puts me in such a different place than what I used to be before. And it made me overall, I think, a better doctor than I was before. I think there's no question about that.
Yeah. Well, your understanding, like we talked about earlier, having those two different unique perspectives on the same topic, to have that, it's got to make you just a more compassionate physician.
I Yeah, I think there's no doubt about it. Although, again, I would say a million times over, would I take Andy back and be less compassionate? Of course I would. Of
Yes.
course I would. We
Yes.
all would. But I
Yes.
can't do that.
Right.
And since I can't do it, you do that. I make the best of what I do have. And that's to try to be the best person I can be with
In
who I
spite of
am
it
now.
all, like you say,
Hmm.
in spite of it all. Marcy, I know that our listeners are going to want to check out your website and your podcast and all those things. Can you tell them where the best place is to find you?
Yeah. So my website is just andysmom.com. So it's really easy. andysmom.com. And then the podcast, as you say, it's called Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. And I wanted to put the Losing a Child in there because it makes it a little bit easier to find if it's in the
SEO.
title. Yes, I know. So, I mean, I always think of myself as always Andy's mom. So on Instagram and on Facebook, I am always Andy's mom. And that's what I always kind of, if you type in always Andy's mom under podcasts, I'm going to be the one that comes up. But in general, the full title is called Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom.
Wonderful. This has been such a great discussion. I think we could talk for hours more about our kids and what we've learned and all of that kind of thing. But I will respect your timelines and just thank you so much for being here. Really, really
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
Really, absolutely, Lisa.
And to our angel moms, take care and we'll catch you next time.